I don't remember what she wore that night, but I remember exactly how it felt when the laughter hit me, sharp, echoing off the marble, louder than it needed to be. Celeste, my wife of 12 years, stood across the gala floor with a glass of champagne in one hand and my manhood in the other, metaphorically, publicly, cruelly. "He's terrible in bed," she said to a cluster of her friends, voice careless and precise, like she'd rehearsed it. The women gasped, then giggled, while her eyes scanned the room until they found mine. She didn't flinch, not even when I stood there holding our daughter's ballet shoes, having come straight from Sienna's rehearsal to surprise them both. That moment didn't just split my ego, it ruptured my understanding of love, loyalty, and who the hell I'd actually married. What stunned me wasn't that she betrayed me, it was how much she enjoyed doing it. There's humiliation, and then there's theatrical execution in front of an audience that knows your name. And that night, she didn't just stab me in the back, she sold tickets, passed out wine, and made it a spectacle. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I didn't know it yet, but the moment my daughter's pink ballet shoes swung from my fingertips, everything I thought I had built, our marriage, our family, my reputation, was already in flames. The shoes still had chalk from the studio, a smudge of rosin dust where her toe had dragged too hard. She'd left them in the car after rehearsal, and I thought it would be sweet to bring them to the gala. Celeste loved public gestures. Or so I thought. The gala was held in the rooftop atrium of the Armitage Club in Tribeca, a vaulted glass palace where the elite went to eat figs they pretended to enjoy and sip wine none of them could pronounce. I wasn't late. I was perfectly on time, but I was out of place. I knew it the moment I stepped off the elevator and saw the way Celeste's shoulder dipped away from mine in the reflection on the glass. She was already laughing when I spotted her. Not the warm laugh she gave our kids, but that slick, high-pitched thing she did when she wanted attention. Her arm was looped casually around Ronan Calix's, his hand casually grazing her hip. Her laugh cut through the crowd like silverware on porcelain. She knew how to draw a room to her, how to make it shimmer with borrowed light. She didn't need a spotlight. She was the flame. That night I realized she wasn't sharing the flame with me. She was burning me with it. I made my way through the clusters of art donors and media columnists, waving off the waiters, trying not to drop Sienna's shoes. A small voice in my head whispered, "This is the wrong place to bring them." But I wasn't thinking about optics. I was thinking about family. Celeste loved symbolic moments. Or maybe that's what I told myself for years. "Celeste," I said, approaching gently. Her head didn't even turn. "Logan," she replied flatly. Not honey, not babe. Just my first name, like I was one of her sponsors. "Oh, you came," Ronan said with a too-wide smile, his teeth glowing like a toothpaste commercial. "Didn't think you'd make it after the kids thing." "Their ballet rehearsal?" I answered, squinting. "You knew about that?" He didn't reply. Celeste reached for a fresh drink, her fingers brushing Ronan's wrist as if she were tuning a piano. The other women around her had that anticipatory silence women share right before someone says something mean. The kind of silence that smells like blood. Celeste delivered. "Logan's sweet," she said loudly, "but terrible in bed." It was a clean shot, no stutter, no laughter afterward to suggest it was a joke, just a statement. The words settled into the space around us like toxic perfume. A couple of them chuckled in disbelief, then paused to see if she'd walk it back. She didn't. Instead, she sipped her drink, eyes drifting to mine with that dead, knowing smirk. That smirk broke something I didn't know could break. I didn't shout. I didn't drop the shoes. I didn't even blink. I just nodded and whispered, understood, and turned. You know the difference between being embarrassed and being humiliated? Embarrassment is internal. Humiliation is when someone hands your insides to a crowd and asks them to vote on whether you're enough. As I walked away, I caught sight of our reflection again. Her surrounded by praise and light, me holding a pair of shoes and nothing else. I left the gala without saying goodbye, without looking back. At home, the apartment was quiet. Sienna had colored a giant chalk sun on the terrace glass. Micah's comic books were splayed across the couch. I placed the ballet shoes on the entryway bench and sat down in silence. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I didn't punch the walls. I sat in the dark and did something far more dangerous. I started thinking. The next morning, I didn't confront her. That's what she wanted. Noise, drama, ammunition. Instead, I greeted the kids, packed their lunches, and made small talk while Celeste refused to meet my eyes. I watched her movements, the way she checked her reflection in the espresso machine, the way she turned her face slightly away from me as if disgust could be subtle. She was testing whether I'd flinch. I didn't. She was used to me arguing, rising, cracking. That day, I didn't. I walked the kids to school, kissed them both on the forehead, and told them I'd be at pickup. Then I returned home, locked the door behind me, and opened my laptop. I wasn't angry. I was surgical. I began with what I knew. Celeste's passwords were always derivatives of her mother's birth year and her favorite poem. The kind of vanity that makes narcissists easy to decode. Within 20 minutes, I had access to her cloud account. What I found wasn't shocking. It was confirming. Photos of her with Ronan, some blurry, some staged. Screenshots of texts. Receipts for hotel stays billed through her cousin's name. All logged, all bookmarked, all downloaded. But the smoking gun wasn't the sex. It was the words. One message from Ronan stuck out. You play the broken wife angle so well. Keep painting him as fragile. Makes the eventual exit cleaner. Cleaner. She wasn't just cheating. She was rehearsing a narrative. I wasn't just being left. I was being cast as the problem. That evening, she asked if I was still being sensitive. I told her I had a client call. She rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath about emotional men. I smiled gently and asked her what she'd like for dinner. She blinked, confused. That was my first win, a quiet one. But you have to understand, winning against people like Celeste doesn't happen in courtrooms or fights. It happens in pacing. It happens in how long you can hold your silence before it becomes a mirror they can't escape. 3 days later, I picked Sienna up from school and brought her to the rooftop garden. She was drawing with chalk again. "Mommy's acting weird," she said out of nowhere. I didn't ask what she meant. Instead, I nodded and handed her another piece of chalk. "People sometimes act weird when they're trying to hide something," I said softly. She looked up at me and nodded back. "Like how you didn't tell her you heard the bed thing?" I froze. She had heard it. "Did that make you sad, Daddy?" I didn't know what to say. For the first time, I let the truth land gently. "Yes," I whispered. "But it didn't break me." She handed me the orange chalk. "Then draw something that shows you're not broken." So I did. I drew a square, then a frame, then a house, then a flame. She giggled and pointed. "You made it on fire." "Not fire," I corrected. "Just light." That night, I tucked her in with that same light still burning behind my eyes, and that was when I knew This wouldn't end with revenge. It would end with her seeing who I became because of what she did, and it would be the one thing she couldn't control.
The next morning, I booked an appointment with a family attorney, just to talk, not to file, not yet, but to begin. She didn't notice. She was too busy live streaming another skincare routine. The world thought she was glowing. But the camera never shows what happens off frame. It started as a whisper, barely audible over the clatter of high heels and the murmured name-dropping in crowded rooms. But in the quiet corners of Tribeca's elite circles, I could feel it spreading. People weren't looking at me the same. Conversations paused when I entered a room, only to resume at a lower volume once I walked past. It wasn't rage or ridicule in their eyes. It was something worse, pity, the kind that eats away at your spine if you let it. I'd learned to live with silence since that night at the gala, but this silence was different. It wasn't mine. It belonged to them, the spectators, the judges, the voyeurs who thrive on the social autopsy of a marriage collapsing in public view. Celeste hadn't just humiliated me. She'd prepped the crowd, laid out the narrative. She wasn't cruel in obvious ways. No, she was calculated. She crafted a story where she was the oppressed one, the emotionally neglected wife, and I was the cold, impotent provider who didn't see her. And people bought it, especially the ones who wanted to. Those who envied what we had now had permission to celebrate its destruction. I didn't push back. I watched. From a distance, I documented everything. Celeste and Ronan had grown bolder since the gala. They thought I was defeated, emasculated into submission. That was their mistake. I hadn't withdrawn in weakness. I was preserving strength. That Tuesday, I met with Mark Talbot, a discreet, high-caliber family attorney known for making quiet wins in explosive cases. The man had a face like a vault door, expressionless, but built for protection. "She's going to go for public sympathy," I told him after explaining what happened. "They always do," he replied, unblinking. "But we have an advantage." I raised an eyebrow. "You have restraint," he continued. "They have theatrics. When things go public, and they will, nobody trusts the loudest person in the room." We spent 2 hours discussing strategy, custody, asset division, reputational damage. But what mattered most to me was the kids. I didn't want them pulled into her performance. I didn't want them weaponized. "You're not fighting for your name," Mark said, as he slid a printed screenshot of Celeste's texts with Ronin across the table. "You're fighting for their future." He was right. When I returned home, the apartment smelled like the florists at a wedding. Celeste was hosting one of her lifestyle brand meetings. Women in beige yoga sets and perfectly neutral expressions floated around the living room, sipping oat milk lattes while discussing collagen peptides. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Can you take the kids to your sister's this weekend?" she asked, casually, as if we were co-parenting roommates. I blinked. "Why?" "Photo shoot, brand expansion, need the space," she replied, still not making eye contact. "Who's shooting it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Ronan," she said. "He's doing the direction." Of course he was. I nodded. "Sure, I'll take them." She looked at me then, briefly, suspiciously. Maybe she expected me to object, to raise my voice. But I didn't. That was her game. I had my own now. That night, after the kids were asleep, I walked past the study where she was typing furiously. I paused. She had her phone propped up, FaceTiming someone. Her laugh was low and intimate. I listened. "You'll be out of there soon," Ronan said. "I know. I just need the right story. I want full support when I leave. I don't want people thinking I'm just some flake." He laughed. "You're not. You're an icon." She sighed. "He's too quiet lately." "It's unsettling." Ronan's voice lowered. "He knows, or suspects."
Then let him, she said with a shrug. Nobody will believe him anyway. I've built this too well. I stepped away before she noticed me. Back in our bedroom, I stared at the ceiling in silence. Her arrogance would be her undoing. 2 days later, Vesper showed up unannounced. She hadn't been to our place since last year's fundraiser. She and Celeste had once been inseparable, two art world darlings, flawless and fierce. But somewhere along the way, Vesper pulled back. I never asked why. She pulled me aside in the hallway. She's spiraling, Vesper said. I know. She's lying to you. I know that too. Vesper hesitated, then added, She's lying to everyone else too. I looked at her more closely. You know about Ronan? I asked. Vesper nodded. I saw them at the Emerson last fall. Not even subtle. I confronted her. She said it was artistic chemistry. That's not all they've got. No, she admitted. And she's using your silence to make you the villain. I swallowed the bitterness that was now a daily flavor in my mouth. Why are you telling me this? I asked her. Because I know what this kind of betrayal does. I watched my own father fall apart when my mother did the same thing. She crafted the story. He stayed silent, and it almost killed him. Celeste won't get that chance, I said quietly. Vesper nodded and placed a USB drive in my palm. She keeps her backups on here, she whispered. All her drafts, emails, contracts. You'll find what you need. She left without another word. That night, I opened the files. Everything was there. Emails between Celeste and Ronan planning their rebranding as a couple. Social media strategy docs outlining how to pivot public support by crafting narratives of empowerment after trauma. She'd written half-finished captions about surviving years of emotional suppression and finally stepping into her truth. The timeline they'd mapped out had me removed before fall. The betrayal wasn't personal to her. It was procedural. She wasn't leaving me. She was replacing me. And she'd rehearsed the script. The next weekend, I took the kids to my sister's. We made waffles, built forts, laughed about Micah's impression of Ronan's annoying designer accent. For a brief moment, I felt normal again. But then, Sunday night came. Back at home, the apartment had been redecorated. The shoot had happened. Photos of Celeste looking soulful and windswept were already populating her Instagram. Comments poured in from her followers, calling her resilient, a vision. So inspiring. She was laying the foundation. She was preparing the world to applaud her escape. But she forgot one thing. I wasn't the kind of man who vanishes. I was the kind who watches, waits, documents, and then acts. Monday morning, I filed the first round of documentation with Mark. She still didn't know. She thought I was still lost in the fog she manufactured. But I was already building the fire she'd walk into with her eyes wide open. It was just beginning. And soon, the whispers in the dark would become headlines. There's a particular shade of silence that settles in a house when both partners have stopped pretending. It's not the silence of peace or exhaustion. It's the silence of a looming war, measured, loaded, and strategically quiet. That's what our penthouse became. Celeste still moved like she was starring in her own biopic. She curated her days with a kind of premeditated grace, yoga poses at golden hour, turmeric lattes on marble countertops, her voice recorded in hushed faux whispers on her morning stories to convey intimacy. To her followers, she was ethereal, enlightened, rising above. To me, she was a woman plotting a coup with a man who couldn't even spell integrity. I stayed in the shadows of her spotlight. I cooked. I packed the kids' lunches. I walked them to school. I kissed their foreheads and promised I would always show up. But behind closed doors, I was building something. The more Celeste postured, the more she slipped. She was too confident, too convinced that silence meant surrender. And Ronan, God, Ronan, was a parody of arrogance. He called himself a visual strategist, though his actual skill lay in manipulation. He wore rings on every finger, showed up to events in mesh shirts, and smirked like he'd written the rules of seduction. But he'd made a mistake. He underestimated a quiet man, and I was done being quiet. The first strike was subtle. I sent an anonymous tip to a gossip page Ronan adored, one of those influencer bait sites that lived off leaked tea and scandal. Just a short, cryptic message. Emerging power couple Celeste and Ronin, not what they seem. Watch the timeline. The receipts are coming. The post dropped on a Thursday morning. Within an hour, it had thousands of comments. Speculation, intrigue, suspicion. Celeste noticed. She walked into the kitchen while I was flipping pancakes for Micah. "Did you see this crap?" she said, waving her phone. "Some troll is trying to sabotage my campaign." I kept my tone even. "What kind of sabotage?" "They're saying I'm—" She lowered her voice, glancing toward Micah. "Involved with Ronan. That I'm faking my empowerment story." I replied, sliding a pancake onto a plate. "Seems reckless. But then again, the internet is full of liars." She stared at me, trying to read if I was behind it. But I didn't blink. I didn't need to defend myself. That's what liars do. That afternoon, I met with Mark again. We finalized the custody strategy. It wasn't about character assassination. And it was about facts, evidence, documentation of parental neglect, misappropriated funds, text messages showing plans to manipulate public perception. It was all there. "The key," Mark said, "is not just proving she's been deceitful, it's proving that her actions have harmed the children's sense of stability. Judges don't care about drama. They care about impact." I nodded. "We've got the impact." Vesper had come through again. She'd delivered screenshots of Celeste making disparaging remarks about the kids to her inner circle, complaining that they were too emotionally needy, that Micah's questions were draining, that Sienna was too attached to Logan's presence. Those weren't just cruel, they were damning. The next twist came when Ronan posted a moody black and white photo of Celeste, eyes closed, lips parted, with the caption, "When truth can't be hidden anymore, we dance in the ash of deception." Subtle, he was not. The internet erupted again. This time, real journalists got curious. They started asking questions. The first email came from an editor at The Standard. "We're interested in exploring the real dynamics behind your separation. Care to comment?" Celeste panicked. She called a family meeting, her, me, and the kids, in the living room, where she tried to paint a picture of unity. She claimed the stories were false, that people were jealous of her success, that Logan, me, was supportive and progressive, and understood nuance. I played along, for now. But something shifted in Sienna that night. As I tucked her in, she whispered, "Is Mommy leaving?" I paused. "What makes you ask that?" "She's been looking at other houses online." I saw. I kissed her forehead. "Whatever happens, you and Micah will always have a home, with me." She nodded. "And love?" "Always." That weekend, Celeste hosted a rooftop soiree, trying to reclaim control of the narrative. Ronan was there, of course, lurking at her side like a shadow in designer loafers. I didn't go. Instead, I sent an encrypted file to 2 reporters I trusted. In it were timelines, receipts, and metadata linking Celeste's staged empowerment campaign to dates that overlapped her affair. There was even a pitch deck titled Celeste Reborn, which she and Ronan had co-written before the gala. By Monday, the first exposé dropped. The headline read, "The Lie Behind the Glow: How a Wellness Icon Manipulated Her Way into Fame." Celeste didn't speak to me for 3 days, which was a gift. But it wasn't over. She tried to do damage control, posting tearful Instagram stories, claiming vulnerability and miscommunication. But public opinion had already turned. Even her sponsors began to pause campaigns. One quietly pulled their name from her website. Another demanded a clarification statement. That's when she broke. Not in front of the camera, but in the kitchen. "I know it was you," she hissed, slamming her glass on the marble island. I kept my voice calm. "Know what? Don't play innocent. You're ruining everything I built." I looked her in the eye. "You built it on lies, Celeste. It was going to collapse eventually. You were supposed to be irrelevant," she snapped. "Forgettable." That one stung, but not because it was true, because it was her truth, her goal. But I smiled. "I was never forgettable, Celeste. You just bet everything on the assumption that I wouldn't fight back." She stormed off. The next day, she received a notice from family court, petition for full custody initiated by Logan Pierce. And that's when the performance stopped. Her glamour thinned. Her posts became defensive. She tried to reframe herself as a protective mother, but every comment section turned into a battlefield. People remembered her words at the gala. And worse, they'd now seen her blueprint. Ronan began to pull back. Quietly. Cowardly. His team issued a vague statement about artistic differences. Rumors swirled that he'd been dropped by his biggest client. Karma was catching up. Meanwhile, I kept showing up. For the kids. For the legal process. For myself. I wasn't fueled by anger anymore. I was fueled by purpose. One morning, Celeste sat across from me at the mediation table. Her eyes were tired, her cheeks no longer sculpted with contour. She looked human. She whispered, "Why are you doing this?" I leaned forward. "Because one day, Sienna and Micah will ask what happened, and I want to look them in the eye and say, 'I protected you from the lie.'" She blinked fast, trying not to cry. But it was too late. The game behind the glamour was over, and I was still standing. It was never just about the betrayal. It was about the way she rewrote the story to make me the villain, how she positioned herself as the reborn goddess who finally found the courage to liberate herself from the invisible cage she pretended I built. Celeste didn't just cheat. She orchestrated a full-blown character assassination wrapped in hashtags and pastel-toned therapy talk. And now, with every quiet, measured step I took, the weight of her own false narrative started pressing down on her like a collapsing ceiling. I wasn't just dismantling her story, I was holding up a mirror, and she couldn't look away. That Monday morning, I received an unexpected email from Micah's school counselor. "Hi, Mr. Pierce. I wanted to reach out regarding a shift in Micah's behavior over the past 2 weeks." I stopped reading and called immediately. "He's been more withdrawn," Ms. Rivas explained gently. "Nothing aggressive or alarming, but he's quieter. His teachers mentioned that he's stopped speaking about his mother in class." Silence. That hit hard. Celeste's lies weren't just bruising my pride anymore. They were creating an emotional fallout for our children. I thanked the counselor and hung up. That night, I didn't confront Celeste directly. I walked into Micah's room, sat on the floor beside his bed, and asked, "Is there something you want to tell me?" He nodded, eyes wide, fragile. "Mom says we might have to live in 2 different houses soon, but I don't want to pick sides. That's like choosing teams. But families aren't teams, right?" "No," I said, fighting the catch in my throat. "Families are homes, and no matter what happens, you'll have one. With me." He leaned into my chest, and I held him until he fell asleep. That was my breaking point. That's when I shifted from defense to offense. The next morning, I filed for an emergency parenting evaluation. My attorneys submitted everything, Celeste's texts to Ronan mocking the kids, The wellness events that caused her to miss school meetings, her public posts aligning herself with post-maternal identity freedom. It wasn't about shaming her for independence. It was about exposing how her freedom was built on neglect. Meanwhile, Celeste was scrambling. Her Instagram had turned into a battlefield. Every post was a mix of damage control and subtle digs. She tried to twist the custody petition as abuse of legal power and an attempt to silence her voice. But the public wasn't buying it anymore. And worse for her, neither were the sponsors. I knew things had shifted when an ad deal with a major skincare brand disappeared from her feed. Quietly. No explanation. Just gone. Then came the message from Vesper. You might want to tune into the Verity podcast this morning. I clicked the link, expecting gossip. What I heard was an audio bloodbath. It was Celeste, candid. Off record. Except, not. The recording, clearly leaked, featured her laughing over brunch with another influencer. She spoke about playing the victim long enough to monetize grief, and joked about Ronin being her revenge phase before she found someone more powerful. It wasn't just crude, it was surgical self-sabotage, and it went viral within hours. Suddenly, Celeste wasn't a martyr. She was a manipulator. People reshared old videos, pairing them with new captions. So this is empowerment? Turns out the villain was just well lit. Ronan tried to spin it, of course. He posted a cryptic note. No truth survives in the mouth of a bitter man. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence around Ronan grew louder. By Thursday, 3 of his clients cut ties. He was no longer a symbol of rebranding. He was radioactive. The next twist came in court. Celeste, now desperate, tried to claim I'd emotionally manipulated the children against her. But the court-appointed psychologist saw through it. Micah's drawings, Sienna's journal entries, they all pointed to one thing: emotional dissonance and maternal absence. Judge Alvarez reviewed everything, then said the one line that would change everything. Until further evaluation, temporary full custody is awarded to Mr. Pierce. Celeste looked gutted, not defiant, not enraged, gutted. She didn't speak to me after that. She tried to reach the kids through her assistant, sent them pre-packaged mom boxes filled with trinkets, notes in glitter pens, and self-help books for children. It all felt performative, hollow. Sienna didn't open hers. Micah asked if he had to. No, I told him. You don't have to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. The household changed after that. Lighter. Still not whole, but healing. We started making Sunday breakfast a tradition. No phones, just pancakes, messy faces, and laughter. I made time for everything. School plays, bedtime rituals, homework. I wasn't trying to replace their mother. I was trying to restore what she fractured. But Celeste wasn't done yet. One final twist. She filed a public countersuit, claiming defamation, mental cruelty, and interference with brand partnerships. It was bold. It was foolish. It was Celeste. But Mark was ready. He released a public statement with factual evidence, timelines, and legal filings. No mudslinging, just truth. And then, for the first time in the entire ordeal, I spoke. I did one interview. Live, calm, grounded. No attacks. Just the truth about prioritizing my children. About staying silent for their protection. About the cost of betrayal when it comes in curated packaging. The audience response was overwhelming. Not because I said something clever, but because I didn't perform. I just told the truth. And people saw me. They saw a father, not a headline, not a scandal. Just a man who didn't vanish. And that, I realized, was the real win. There are moments when the lies someone builds become so tangled, so bloated, that the weight of holding them up finally caves in on itself. And Celeste, who spent years engineering a reality that existed only in filtered photos and polished sound bites, had reached that moment.
She didn't know it yet, but everything she'd built was about to come crashing down. It started quietly, not with a public scandal or a fiery courtroom outburst, but with silence, the kind that creeps in after a storm, eerie and absolute. Her online engagement was dwindling. Her sponsors were hesitating. Her messages to the children went unanswered. Even her inner circle, those who once orbited her like planets around a sun, began to pull away. She had become toxic, even to herself. The countersuit she filed was collapsing under scrutiny. Her legal team was disorganized and reactive, relying more on headlines than evidence. Her defamation claim couldn't survive the public record, and her accusations of mental cruelty unraveled quickly when placed beside documented screenshots, timelines, and testimony from parenting experts and educators. Celeste had played a high-stakes emotional chess game, but she'd been so busy framing her moves as empowering, she forgot the board was real. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding the pieces she'd fractured. I wasn't after vengeance. I was after permanence. For my children. For my peace. For the version of me that existed before I was gaslit into believing I was somehow disposable. In court, I was quiet, but deliberate. Mark had prepared me thoroughly. "You're not here to destroy her character," he reminded me. "You're here to restore yours and prove who the better parent really is." That resonated. When the judge asked me to explain my reasons for seeking full custody, I didn't launch into a dramatic speech. I didn't dredge up old wounds or use her mistakes as weapons. I spoke plainly. My children need consistency, love, presence, and safety. Their mother is preoccupied with her brand. With perception, I'm not asking the court to punish her. I'm asking for permission to protect them. That was it. Simple, true. Celeste's attorney objected to everything, of course. They tried to paint me as controlling, emotionally repressive, even intimidated by powerful women, but their arguments collapsed under cross-examination. The receipts spoke louder than rhetoric. Meanwhile, Ronan was unraveling on his own stage. 3 major fashion clients dropped him in a single week. One released a brutal statement about his lack of professional integrity and personal decorum. His smug posts turned bitter, then desperate, then vanished. Eventually, an anonymous tipster released screenshots of Ronan propositioning a married client during a brand retreat. The internet exploded. He deleted his social media within 48 hours. And Celeste? She stayed silent. No posts, no press, no rebuttals. The woman who once fed off attention like oxygen was now nowhere to be found. But the legal process continued. The custody hearing resumed after a brief recess. Child Services presented their evaluation. The summary was devastating. For Celeste, Micah had drawn a picture of our home, bright and full of life. He drew Celeste's place as a square with no windows and a "Do Not Enter" sign. Sienna wrote in her journal that she felt most safe when it was just Dad and me and Micah. Those weren't weapons, they were wounds, and they were enough. The judge ruled in my favor. Full legal and physical custody, granted. Celeste was allowed limited supervised visitation for now, pending further review. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she just stared at the floor. And I walked out of that courtroom feeling neither victorious nor vindicated. I felt free. But I wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, I hosted a small dinner in my apartment. Just a few friends, Vesper, Mark, my sister, who had flown in after the ruling. The kids helped me make tacos. We laughed. We told stories. We healed. It wasn't extravagant, but it was real. That night, after Sienna went to bed and Micah fell asleep on the couch, I stepped out onto the balcony. The city pulsed below. For the first time in years, I breathed deeply. Then my phone buzzed. It was an email. From Celeste. Subject: I'm sorry. The body was just one line.
You were never terrible in bed. I just needed to hurt you before you left me. I stared at it. No anger, no satisfaction, just clarity. That was her final truth. A confession, a surrender, a wound she finally exposed not for redemption, but for relief. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. But I saved the email. Not to use against her, not to share, but to remember. To remember that even the most dazzling lies are still lies, and that even the cruelest betrayal doesn't define your worth. A week later, Sienna asked if she could paint her room. Anything you want, I told her. She picked ocean blue and starry white. Micah chose dinosaurs and solar systems. Our home became loud again, bright, messy, alive. And Celeste? She quietly moved out of her luxury loft. Her social media accounts were wiped clean. Rumors swirled that she was taking time off to heal privately. Maybe she was. I hoped she was. But that was her path, not mine. My path was here, making pancakes with the kids on Sunday mornings, helping Sienna with her school play lines, teaching Micah how to ride a bike in the park near our building, working late sometimes, yes, but always home for dinner. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge. I had peace, and it tasted better than any victory.
The oddest thing about betrayal is how clean the silence feels once the chaos dies down. No more reactive spins. No more fake narratives to untangle.
Just the sound of your own breath. Steady, whole, returned. That was what the house felt like now. Not empty, not vengeful, just restored. But even in peace, there are reckonings that demand their moment. And that moment came one morning with an envelope. No lawyer, no drama, just a quiet knock at the door, and a courier dropping off a thick envelope with my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. Celeste. I stood by the kitchen counter, the kids still sleeping, sunlight barely breaking through the curtains. I didn't open it immediately. I watched it for a while, as if the pages might reveal their contents on their own. Eventually, I unfolded the seal. Inside were 20 printed pages. A letter. Not typed. Handwritten. It began like a diary. I lied to everyone. And at some point, I started lying to myself. She wrote about Ronan, about how it wasn't love or even lust. It was a calculated reaction, a performance. She said she thought she could convert pain into power, but it turned into poison. She had become the very thing she claimed to be escaping, manipulative, self-serving, detached from reality. And worst of all, she knew it the moment the judge read his decision out loud. I didn't lose my family in that courtroom. I lost them months before, maybe years. She confessed to leaking parts of the podcast audio herself, to manipulate sympathy. But it backfired, and her last remaining sponsors had dropped her days later. Then came the part that made me sit down. I watched Sienna's interview for her school newspaper. She said her hero was you. I couldn't breathe after that. I paused. Sienna had never told me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just trying to stop pretending. I'm tired of pretending. There was no request, no manipulative hope of reunion, no rebranding attempt. Just her. Broken. Finally, honest. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made me realize something. This wasn't about punishing her anymore. It was about releasing myself. And I finally could. Later that day, I met with Mark to finalize the post-custody restructuring. He glanced over the letter. She's finally falling apart, he muttered. No, I corrected. She's facing herself. That's different. He nodded. So what now? I looked out the office window. I build. That rebuilding began in small but powerful ways. The studio finally reopened, and my clients returned steadily. But I turned down 3 high-paying jobs that would have required long travel. Money wasn't the priority anymore. Presence was. The kids were thriving. Sienna had joined her school's student council. Micah started therapy. His idea.
He told me he wanted to keep his thoughts organized. That alone was proof that I had done something right. Celeste requested 1 supervised visit. It was awkward, polite. The kids didn't know how to respond. She brought board games and snacks they didn't like. She tried too hard. But she didn't guilt them. She didn't cry. She just sat and listened. Afterward, Sienna told me, "It felt weird, but I wasn't scared." That was a win. Later, Micah asked if he could bring one of the dinosaurs he'd painted for her. I let him. It wasn't about giving her redemption. It was about teaching them resilience, that we don't have to stay hurt just because someone hurt us. That evening, I got a call from Ronan. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Pierce," he said, his voice smaller than I remembered. "You won." I wasn't playing. He laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, you still did." There was silence. Then, "I just called to say, I was never after your life. I was after hers. You were collateral. You used a family to feed your ego," I said. "You weren't just a mistake. Celeste picked you because you made her feel justified." He didn't deny it. "I'm moving," he added. "Somewhere quieter. This city's not built for collapse." "I disagree," I said. "It's built for comebacks. You just need to start from truth." He chuckled again. "Not all of us are made for truth." He hung up, and I felt nothing. Not rage, not pity, just closure. A few weeks later, we had our first full Thanksgiving without Celeste. Just me, Sienna, Micah, my sister, Vesper, and a couple of friends. We cooked together. We laughed. We each went around the table and said what we were grateful for. When it was Sienna's turn, she stood up. "I'm thankful for second chances," she said, "because sometimes the first time around, people don't see what they already have. But when we get a second chance, we should protect it better." Micah raised his juice box in agreement. That night, after they went to bed, I stepped onto the same balcony where months earlier I had read Celeste's apology. The city still pulsed. My world still turned. But everything was different now. I was not the man she painted me to be. I was not the shadow she left behind. I was a father, a provider, a constant. The real story, the one that mattered, wasn't told in headlines or hashtags. It was written in the quiet moments, the bedtime rituals, the Sunday pancakes, the healing. And I knew, without a doubt, that the final chapter wasn't hers to write. It was mine. Some victories don't come with fanfare. No roaring applause, no bright headlines, just a slow, deliberate breath, a kind of stillness that tells you the storm is truly over. That's how it felt 6 months later, on the morning of Sienna's school showcase. Micah was sitting at the kitchen counter in his usual dino pajamas, sipping hot chocolate. Sienna stood by the full-length mirror adjusting the blazer she insisted on wearing, because confidence has a uniform, Dad. She was 11, going on 30. "You ready?" I asked. "Born ready," she replied. I smiled, locking the apartment behind us. There was no rush, no chaos, no awkward tension, just ease, something we hadn't known in years. That evening, I watched her walk onto the auditorium stage with the kind of poise I'd only seen in grown women giving TED Talks. She took a deep breath, unfolded her note cards, and began. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't fidget. She spoke about resilience, about redefining the idea of home, about how sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who chooses peace over noise. She didn't mention Celeste by name. She didn't need to. But everyone in that auditorium, including Celeste, who sat 3 rows behind me, knew who the speech was about. After the showcase, Celeste approached us in the hallway. She looked subdued, older somehow, not in age but in spirit, like the fire had finally burned out. "She was incredible," she said quietly. "She is," I agreed. Sienna gave her a polite smile but stuck close to my side. Celeste didn't try to force a hug. She didn't offer empty praise or guilt. She simply looked at her daughter and whispered, "I'm proud of you," and walked away. That was the last time I saw her in person. The next few weeks passed in rhythm. Micah was learning to code through a kids' tech camp. Sienna had joined a poetry club. I was invited to speak at a creative fatherhood panel hosted by a mental health nonprofit. Life didn't just feel normal, it felt grounded. And then came the unexpected call, not from Celeste, not from Ronan, but from a reporter. They were doing a follow-up feature on digital reputations and how high-profile personal controversies play out long-term. Celeste had been mentioned in the early drafts, and they wanted my comment. "Off record?" I asked. "On record," they replied. "Unless you decline." I paused. 6 months ago, I might have considered it. I might have been tempted to set the record straight in front of a wider audience. But I had nothing to prove anymore. "My story doesn't need a headline," I said. "My kids already know it." That was the end of it. One rainy Saturday, Sienna found an old photo album while cleaning the hallway closet. We sat on the floor flipping through images, birthdays, beach trips, kindergarten milestones. Eventually, she pointed to one, me and Celeste, smiling in front of a Christmas tree. "I used to think you were perfect together," she said. "We were happy for a time," I replied. "Do you miss her?" The question didn't sting. "No," I said honestly. "But I respect who she used to be, before it all became something else." Sienna nodded. "I think I'm starting to understand that." Later that night, Micah asked if I would ever get remarried. "I don't know," I said. "Would you tell us first?" "Always." He grinned. "Then it's okay." Weeks later, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Just my name, handwritten. Inside was a single line. "Thank you for raising them better than I ever could." It was unsigned, but I knew. And for the first time, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sorrow. Not for what we'd lost, but for the fact that it ever had to be lost at all. Still, closure comes in strange forms, not as a finish line, but as a door you choose not to reopen. The final piece of healing came unexpectedly. Sienna's poetry club hosted an open mic night at a small venue downtown. She asked if I would read one of her poems. "Me?" I asked. "You're the only person I trust with my words," she said. So I did. I stood in front of strangers and read her piece titled "Strong is Quiet." It was raw, fierce, beautiful, about fathers who stay and mothers who leave in noise, about how strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shows up every morning with pancakes and patience. I didn't cry while reading. But when I stepped down, every person in that room stood and applauded. Not for me, for her. And maybe a little for the truth that lives between the lines. Later that night, Sienna and I walked home under the streetlights. She grabbed my hand, something she hadn't done since she was little. "I don't hate her anymore," she whispered. "I know. But I love you more than ever." I squeezed her hand. "That's all I need." Micah was already asleep when we got home, curled up next to his growing collection of space books. I tucked Sienna in, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't replay the past in my mind before bed. I didn't try to understand where things went wrong.
I didn't search for justice in places that had already given it. I simply slept. Because peace, I've learned, is not loud. It is not public. It does not need validation. It just is. And in that stillness, in the quiet triumphs of everyday fatherhood, I found something better than revenge. I found wholeness. Life doesn't always end with dramatic closure or poetic justice. Sometimes it settles with quiet clarity, the kind that doesn't demand attention but redefines everything. Betrayal, heartbreak, humiliation. These aren't just story arcs. They are ruptures in the fabric of trust and identity. They leave behind questions that may never find answers and wounds that may never fully vanish. But even in that pain, there is possibility. Not of returning to who you were before, but of becoming something stronger, more grounded, more whole. There are moments in life when we are forced to choose between bitterness and balance, between chasing justice and building peace, between proving a point and protecting what truly matters. And the most powerful choice is often the one made in silence, choosing presence over performance, love over ego, consistency over chaos. At some point, healing becomes less about confronting those who hurt you and more about confronting the parts of yourself that were broken by them. It's about learning to stand in the mirror and see dignity staring back, not because the world gave it to you, but because you reclaimed it when everything tried to take it away. Sometimes, the loudest victories aren't won in courtrooms or public stages. They're won at kitchen tables, in bedtime rituals, in the steady breath of children who feel safe again, in the way your spirit no longer flinches when you pass the places where it all began to unravel. Real triumph isn't always visible. It's felt. And perhaps the most radical form of closure is this: not needing an apology to move on, not needing your side of the story to be understood by everyone, not needing revenge to feel powerful. The real flex is being able to walk forward, with grace, with clarity, and with your soul intact, while the people who broke you are left to wrestle with the echo of their own choices. Because in the end, it's not the betrayals that define us. It's what we do after. It's how we rebuild. It's how we show up for the people who never walked away. It's how we learn to live not in reaction to the pain, but in devotion to the peace we earned by surviving it. And if you take anything from this story, let it be this: you are not what was done to you. You are what you became in spite of it. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or reflect in any way, drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Your voice helps us keep these stories alive and helps others know they're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of resilience, redemption, and quiet victory. Until next time, take care of your peace. It's yours, and it's worth everything.